Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We got him.
Finally, the manhunt was over. 33 hours after political activist Charlie Kirk was shot dead while addressing students at Utah Valley University, the police arrested this man, Tyler Robinson. They had scrutinised these videos of the alleged shooter escaping across a roof, dropping to the ground, running for nearby woods. Robinson was caught after apparently confessing to a family member who passed the information on to a friend. A 22-year-old local from Utah was perhaps not who they expected.
I was praying that if this had to happen here, that it wouldn't be one of us, that somebody drove from another state, somebody came from another country. But it did happen here, and it was one of us.
Robinson had grown up in Washington County with his parents and two younger brothers. Social media posts show him posing happily with his family, travelling the country, clearly introduced to guns at a young age.
Congratulations, you have been selected.
Robinson was highly intelligent, filmed here reading out news of a $32,000 scholarship to Utah State University to a cheering mother.
This scholarship is available for 4 years or 8 semesters.
Though he left after one semester. Now the question gripping America is, why would this 22-year-old suspect want to shoot one of MAGA's most influential activists? Trump ally Kirk took his conservative and often provocative views into schools and colleges, welcoming the fierce debate he attracted. Robinson appears to have not been affiliated politically, but a family member told officers he had become more political and was full of hate. And a bullet casing found with the rifle used in the shooting was engraved with anti-fascist slogans.
Here's the President of the United States. Great to see you, Mr. President.
Welcome, Mr. It was Donald Trump who broke the news to the nation this morning.
5 minutes before I walked in, as I'm walking in, they said, looking real good. They have the person that they wanted.
He made clear who he blames.
The radicals on the left are the problem, and they're vicious, and they're horrible, and they're politically savvy.
The president was speaking more broadly here, but yesterday directly linked the radical left's rhetoric to Kirk's murder. Back in Utah, the Republican governor struck a different tone.
And there is one person responsible for what happened here, and that person is now in custody.
He called for people across political divides to come together.
We can always point the finger at the other side. And at some point, we have to find an off-ramp, or it's going to get much, much worse.
Meanwhile, FBI Director Kash Patel offered this.
To my friend Charlie Kirk, rest now, brother. We have the watch, and I'll see you in Valhalla.
A cryptic reference to Viking mythology, but a tribute to a close friend of the administration whose body has been taken home to Arizona by Vice President J.D. Vance.
And Anushka is in Washington now. Anushka, how are people reacting to the identity of the suspected killer?
Well, I think in some ways there is confusion. Tyler Robinson comes from what looks like a pretty traditional family in Utah. Some suggestions in the media that the family itself was Republican. I was just speaking to a former politician from Utah who said, Tyler Robinson looks like all the guys I grew up with. And there was nothing unusual about someone in that state going to shooting ranges when they were young. He himself, if there was a manifesto, hasn't obviously put that out on social media, or it's not been seen yet. But there is a lot of focus on those bullets and that engraving that seem to have anti-fascist ideology, and a fear that political tensions are going to rise here, that the right will see this as a potent symbol and look for some sort of vengeance. You know, when I was standing by the site yesterday, there was someone there with a placard that said Democrats killed Charlie Kirk. And Jen Goldbeck, who's a professor of computer science at Maryland University, has been looking looking into this, scouring 3,000 social media posts since this killing took place, and says that alongside the grief and the anger, there is this sense of wanting vengeance. There is a suggestion that there has been radicalization. She told Reuters that people are looking for the narrative that they want out of this, and that is why there are so many calls for unity right now. Democrat politicians have also said that this is absolutely outrageous. The leaders of both the minority leaders of the House and of the Senate saying we need unity right now. The same message from the governor that you heard from in Utah.
Anushka in Washington, thanks very much indeed. Well, earlier I spoke to Fred Fleitz, the former National Security Council Chief of Staff in the first Trump administration, and I asked him what he thought about the incredible outpouring of raw grief by politicians, but also so many members of the public following Charlie Kirk's death.
He had incredible interpersonal skills. He was very charismatic. I know a lot of people who really admired him and his energy and his effort to go to college campuses and say, ask me anything. Let's debate what we disagree with. Let's see if we can come to agreement through an open debate.
Do you think he should lie in state, like Nancy Mace, the congresswoman, has suggested, in the Capitol, like former presidents?
Well, there are people who were not presidents, who were important Americans who have lied in state, and if that's what the president wants, it's his prerogative.
So the language was interesting, wasn't it? Because President Trump almost immediately said, this is the radical left to blame. Then he pointed the finger at the Democrats. There are other people in Congress who used incredibly abrasive language about the Democrats being responsible for this before we even knew who the suspect was. We now know, but we didn't know to this stage. Do you think that was a dangerous thing to do?
I'm very concerned about how political relations between both sides have deteriorated. I'll concede that it's gone on by both sides, but I think the hostile rhetoric and the move to violence by the left in the U.S. has been much, much worse, and I don't think the Democratic Party has done anything about it.
Do you really think that? Because, I'm talking about this particular killing. In the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's murder, Presidents Obama and Biden, Nancy Pelosi, whose own husband was almost bludgeoned to death by an extremist, they all came out and said, let's just all calm down. This is a terrible, terrible tragedy, what's happened to the Kirk family. That's not what I heard from Republicans.
I think these Democratic leaders deserve a lot of credit for doing that. But when we had enormous violence destroying cities in the summer of 2024, Democratic politicians didn't want to condemn it. And we have so many Democrats calling Trump a fascist and a dictator. This kind of rhetoric, I think, is dangerous. Look, is it going on both sides? I don't dispute that.
Including the late Charlie Kirk. So, there's so many phrases I've got in front of me. Here's one. Islam is the sword the left is using to slit the throat of America. And here's another one, which is so sad and poignant under the circumstances, where he said, the cost of gun deaths is worth it every single year so that we can have the Second Amendment to protect our God-given rights to own guns. This is a prudent deal. This is rational, he said. And then, of course, he was killed by someone who used a rifle against him. How ironic and tragic is that?
It's ironic that someone killed him who didn't have the courage to talk with him. He could walk up. It could be, we'll find video, that this coward who shot Charlie Kirk was engaged in these debates. But, hate speech is something that democracies permit.
But he was using his own hate speech to counter the hate speech from the left.
I don't think that's a fair thing to say. And if you want to cherry pick things that he said to try to justify...
Well, hang on a minute. Islam is the sword the left is using to slit the throat of America. There are some pretty abrasive comments out there, and I don't think he would be hiding from them. I just want to ask you finally, if I may, when we get to a stage where, you have this amount of, raw grief and raw anger about the death of one man, like poor Charlie Kirk, and people are talking about civil war, and then you put into the mix 50 million arms in private hands. America seems to be in a dangerous place at the moment. Would you agree with that or not?
No, I don't think people are talking about civil war. You read my article on American Greatness. I'm hoping that Charlie Kirk will inspire other Charlie Kirks to promote freedom of expression on college campuses and drive out radical professors. That's where I think this is going. His movement to mobilize conservative students on campus, that's what I think will get a boost from his martyrdom. I don't see any indication this is going to lead to violence.
Even though there are people calling for violence, on both sides.
There's always crazy people saying something nuts in every country. Frankly, I haven't seen that today. The conservative movement doesn't advocate violence. The Democratic Party doesn't advocate violence. I think they're tolerating violence more than the conservatives do by fringe elements, and we need to work on that.
I guess they would say the truth the same as of your side. Anyway, we'll leave it there. Fred Flights, thank you very much indeed.
Good to be here.
Well, let's speak now to Robert Shibley, a lawyer from the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, an organization dedicated to defending free speech on US college campuses. Thank you very much for coming on the program, Robert. I mean, there's a lot of discussion at the moment in your country, but also here watching events on the other side of the ocean about how much political violence there is in America now. How much is there right now?
Well, we've been fortunate in America that with the exception of some, very high-profile assassinations, particularly in the 60s, that America has been, most Americans, it's not a common experience for us to experience political violence. And that's why I think the assassination of Charlie Kirk has been potentially a watershed moment here, because people actually got to see that up-close video of what it means when people actually engage in political violence instead of discussing and debating the way Charlie Kirk was doing.
And when you say watershed, and that's a word that's been used quite a lot today, what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean that I'm hoping that it will lead to a greater understanding that talk is cheap when it comes to saying that you are willing to engage in political violence. Our own surveys of college students, for instance, say that college students' willingness to contemplate violence to stop, at least sometimes, some speech on campus has gone from 20% 5 years ago to 34% this year. But that's during a time when people haven't experienced a huge amount of political violence up close, in their face, and personal. Now we've got 3,000 in-person witnesses at Utah Valley University. We've got Charlie Kirk's grieving family, and we've got everybody online who saw that awful video, who, hopefully, I think that's why there's this hope that it will be a watershed, that people will finally say, okay, this is not the kind of country we want to have, and it's not the kind of country we have to have.
Americans are very proud of their, free speech amendment, and they often criticize people in this country or politicians for trying to muzzle free speech. But has America got to a point where there's almost an excess of free speech, and the stuff that is said out there is so inflammatory that it can have tragic consequences?
I don't think we have an excess of free speech. I think that one of the fundamental reasons you need free speech is so that you know what people are actually thinking. We live in a huge, diverse democracy. I mean, obviously, much bigger than the UK, although obviously the UK is a big, diverse place as well. But you're always, in a place like this, you're always going to be around a whole lot of people who have very diametrically opposed beliefs, views, etc. And if you don't have this norm saying, all right, you know what, we are not going to resort to violence when they say something I don't like, there's no way to keep that from getting out of control.
Okay, but here's the other obvious point. Certainly it seems obvious to us, although it's not discussed a lot in America. If you have abrasive speech, free speech taken to extremes, and you've got someone with a grudge who then gets access to a gun, then you've got a problem.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's if somebody, I think that the general feeling among many Americans is that if people are going to resort to violence, they're going to find some way to do that. And it's interesting. There's a parallel, a historical parallel to this. Back in the 1960s, there were more than 2,500 bombings in an 18-month period, political bombings in the late 60s, early 70s, and those were. At that point, bombing was apparently the way that political violence expressed itself. Right. Now, obviously, we've got shooting, but of course they had guns then too.
Okay, but if Tyler Robinson hadn't had that kind of gun, if he'd just been armed with a crossbow even, or a knife, he would not have been able to do probably what he did. Not from that distance.
Yeah, probably
anyway.
not. I'm sure that people who are making the pro-gun argument would say, well, he would have just found a different way to do it. And there's no way to disprove that, of course.
Okay, Robert Shibley, thank you very much indeed for your time.